Great. So what's the antidote? To give it up. To give it up. To accept. To give up control. Anxiety gets worse when you fight it. And it gets better when you accept it. It's really that simple. You spoke about it earlier. Having those papers that you were holding on to that kept you going, that was control. And what set them free? You burned them. You're like, I'm not going to control it this way in my life. Somewhere with a straight view all the way down, not, dangerous, but like somewhere where there's a ledge that you can push yourself up against, not the other side of the ledge, this side of the ledge, otherwise it's fear. And I want you to look over it until your anxiety naturally goes away on its own. And he said, you are crazy. There's no way I'm going to do that. I'm going to vomit. I'm going to lose control of I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to jump. I'm like, maybe. Maybe he was going to jump. And let go. Stop fighting it. Let go. Let it. The entire Golden Gate Bridge, on foot, he was looking over the rail the entire time, saying, Ein od milvado, ein od milvado, ein od milvado. And he said he was shaking because he was off the bridge. No. He was happy because he had stood up to his anxiety. He stood up to it and he said, I don't have to be in control. In another more complicated case, I had a single firm female for years because she was so ashamed about having OCD. She had these relentless obsessions that she might have a brain aneurysm and that it was going to explode, and nobody wants that to happen, so she would stay at home. She thought maybe when she got anxious that her brain would get worse and then it would really explode. By the time she came to me, she had not been outside for like 2 years. Like religious stuff-ish, but washing her hands before she went to bed, when she woke up in the morning, anytime she did anything. She wanted to protect herself physically, and she was using halacha, really, in order to, not to relate to Hashem, she was using it to control her safety. And when we went through her compulsions and her obsessions, we had a huge, literally a Megillah, it was like 70, 80, a huge list of like between 70 and 80 areas of dysfunction, areas of compulsions and obsessions that she had. So I said, if you come to treatment here, you're going to lose it. Like you're going to lose it. I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. I'm meaner than the other people in my office, by the way. She faced every single one of her fears. She said, okay, I'm in. And she faced every one of her fears head on, crying, screaming at times. It was not pretty. No relaxation techniques, no medication, no Xanax. Yes, with the psak from her Rav, of course. But she embraced the possibility of her imminent death through an aneurysm every single day. And she died. I'm kidding. Alive and well, married, happily married, couple kids, living in Lakewood, Cola wife, the dream. She got the dream. Not only is she OCD free, but she's an all-star. She's an all-star. When people worry, what do we tell them to do? Worry more. Very good. We schedule worry time, and not just like a little bit of worry, like what if, what if, what if. No, like really what if. Like really, what if you had cancer? Really, what if you woke up and you got that note from the doctor? Can you go there in your mind? That's what it's like to treat anxiety. It's hard. It's hard. And it should be hard. That's fine. That's part of it. It's okay to be out of control. That's what treatment is about. For people with panic disorder, what do you think we do? We get them to we have all these ways of getting people to panic. Oh man, my office is so much fun. We have these little straws that they breathe through, like 2 millimeters, maybe 3 millimeter ones. I'm from Canada. Like, percent of the things I ask my patients to do, I have to do it myself. We get them to like put on like a parka in the middle of the summer and blast the heat so they're like schwitzing and really hot. We get them to spin around in a chair and they're completely dizzy. Then we have them stand up and like fall over, and lots of fun. We have strobe lights in the office because getting the lighting thing going, get them dizzy, we get them depersonalized. It's tons of fun. Social anxiety. What do we do for social anxiety? Who has social anxiety here? You raised your hand? Really? With an anxiety treater, like with an exposure therapist at the front of the office, at the front of the room, you actually read that was gutsy, whoever did that. Fine, whoever has anxiety, come up here and give a 5-minute speech on anything you want. Come on. Okay, all right, good. But bottom line, that's what we do. We have them come in and give a talk. We have them, oh, this is fun. If they're nervous about upsetting other people, they're like really nervous about something, we send them to a Starbucks during rush hour, and we have them pay for their drink in nickels. Now, in certain areas of Manhattan, that actually induces fear, not anxiety, because people will kill you. But with that important exception, people do overcome it. Now, when I was developing my clinics in New York, a lot of colleagues said to me, why are you calling it the Center for Anxiety? Call it the Center for Anxiety Treatment or the Center for Anxiety Relief. But now you know why. I don't help people to become less anxious. I make them more anxious. Because that's the trick. Once you accept it, then it goes away. And our method, of course, the goal is to, help people. And in a recent study, we looked at we take data very seriously. And we measure outcomes at every single session with our adult patients anyway, and we're rolling something out with the kids. And in a recent study of several hundred patients, 97% of them had clinically significant reduction in anxiety over the treatment, and 80% of patients with mild to moderate anxiety were actually below the clinical threshold within 7 sessions. It's a powerful paradigm. It doesn't work orders. At a minimum, it's fun. Only the first line treatment. Okay, I'm going to conclude by saying as follows. If you look in Sifrei Chazal, in Musar and in Chassidus, about anxiety, what you find, it's even actually literally on your chairs, you find there's one theme that comes up a lot, which is Emunah and Bitachon. Faith in the Ribbono Shel Olam. And it's no accident that clinical science points to the importance of giving up control and accepting life as uncertain as the foremost antidote to anxiety, because these are part and parcel of having faith in God. To put it bluntly, either you're in control or God's in control. Recognizing, not just intellectually, but in your heart and behaviorally, and going there, that we're not in control, that's a first step to building emunah. Somebody said at the beginning that emunah is not enough. I actually disagree. I just have a bit of a different connection on what emunah is. Emunah is being able to accept that you're not in control. I mean, mamish, that we're not in control. And if you do that, then it is enough. And this is not simply a psychological message, ironically. And by the way, I didn't learn this from my Rebbeim. I did, but I learned this from psychological science. It's an incredible thing. There's a deep spiritual concept here. So therefore, if you truly want to break up with anxiety, there is only one solution. Go on more dates with anxiety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rosmarin. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Norman Blumenthal. He is a practicing licensed clinical psychologist with over 40 years of experience. His specific interest is in the area of trauma and all types of its effect on psychological well-being. He is also deeply involved in educating teens and adults about mental health issues. He currently serves as the Director of Trauma and Crisis Intervention for Ohel Children's Home and Family Services. Please welcome Dr. Blumenthal.
Okay, thank you very much. Standing here at this point actually reminds me of a very seminal event in my life. I reached a point, thank God, where I was conducting a Seder and my first grandchild was old enough to be at the Seder. And so this is great. was a wonderful experience. So many of you have had the experience passing the Masorah on to the next generation. So I break the matzah, and I turn to him, and I say, Shmu, which is his nickname. I say, Shmu, you know why we eat matzah? Because the Jews were rushing out of Egypt, and they didn't have time to make bread. And he looks at me and says, I know that already. So then I take out the maror, and I show him the way. So you know why we eat maror? Because everything was so bitter and all that. And he rolls his eyes, and he said, I know that already. Well, hardly 5 minutes passed, and I was discussing a machlokas between Rabbi Kiva Egan and Mukha Yosef about some detail in the carbon pest, trying to find something the kid didn't know already. After these two speeches that you've heard already, I expect that anything I'm going to say, you're going to stand here and say, I know that already. So I'll try to just embellish upon what has been said, but most has been said already. First of all, let me start with the thank yous. Thank Moshe Hanun and Rainu for all the work that they've done. From the OHEL end in the back of the room, I want to thank Sivi Ryder, who really organized it from our end. And also thank David Mendel and the entire OHEL board, who makes it possible for us to do the work. I think OHEL is one of the best kept secrets in New York, the scope of the services that they provide. I know that when I joined them 5 years ago, I didn't even know myself how much they've done. But let me start with one story, and I think that'll help shape the piece that I want to focus on, which was a defining moment in my development as a clinician. And it goes back many more years than I care to think. I was graduating YU in 1974, and at that time, just about everybody from YU was either going into law or medicine. And I was going into psychology. I was an upper senior, and I had the very special zchus of spending 3 years in the shiur of Rav Aaron Kreiser, Zichrono Livracha. And those, many of you may know who Rav Kreiser was and what he represented. Really an astounding Talmid Chacham from the Alta Mir that went through Shanghai. And I was an upper senior. I was accepted into my first choice as a graduate program. I had 1.5 feet out the door, and he was giving me some very well-deserved musar. And at one point he said in the middle, he said, "You're going to medical school, right?" And I said, "No." He said, "Going to law school?" And I said, "No." So what are you doing? I said, "Psychology." He said, "Psychology." And he took me outside, and he put me up against the wall, and with his finger in my face, he said to me, "Blumenthal, you want to be a psychologist, you got to be a gaon. You got to be a genius. So a doctor, a lung is a lung, but every patient who comes into your office is a parsha bifnei atzma, is a unique person." And then he said, "So listen to your professors, read the books, and study hard, because it's not an easy profession." As was mentioned, I'm over 40 years in the field, and every time I get a new patient, I see Rabbi Kreiser in front of me. And I say to myself, "Blumenthal, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this, how much you lecture, how much you've published, you're now starting from scratch." You've heard some wonderful descriptions, and certainly the cutting-edge work in anxiety. The problem, I think, is that we can't just look at it as cookie cutters. Each person is unique. And it was mentioned earlier in the beautiful introductory speech that this treatment is unique in that it's a collaborative treatment. You don't anesthetize patients and cut the anxiety out of them. You work with them, and every person is unique. Now, there's no question that exposure therapy and behavioral treatment is the treatment of choice, the primary treatment for anxiety, and certainly our staff in the OHEL clinics have been trained in evidence-based treatments, including treatments for family, et cetera, and are constantly being updated and retrained. And the reason for that is very simple. As was mentioned earlier, fear is good, and fear is essential for survival. But for that reason, fear can get very easily disconnected from the cause of the fear, or the original reason for the fear, because you need fear. So I can give you a very simple example. Those of us who are parents, and it's probably experience we've all had, that one time when our toddler started to run out into the street or did something comparably scary, we scared the living daylights out of them. And they have it in their psyche, so they won't do that again. And it's not because it's connected to, "Oh my God, my father or my mother got so angry." It's because it's now taken on a life of its own. Now that's good, that's adaptive. But when a fear is generated, as mentioned, that is not warranted by the reality of the world out there or by what's happening, therefore morphs into an anxiety disorder, sometimes the original cause or the original reason why it became a source of anxiety is no longer relevant. It takes on a life of its own. And therefore, the treatment has to be very much a symptom treatment, has to be that re-exposure. The other reason is that when you're afraid of something, you avoid it. So therefore, you have to face it in order. That's the paradox of treatment for anxiety. But there are other treatments, some of which are sometimes more indicated or certainly maybe an adjunct to the actual treatment, the exposure treatment, the behavioral treatment for therapy that deserves its focus as well. And I think since the other types of treatment have been so exhaustively focused on, I want to focus on some of those alternative approaches and what people can do for family members who have anxiety. As I mentioned at OHIL, we have a program that's called the SPACE program. It was developed in Yale, which is to help families who have a loved one, a member of the family, who is suffering from anxiety. So first, I want to say a little bit about medication. Medication can be mistreated. Medication also for most psychiatric conditions is not a cure. But for that matter, as our medical student can probably attest to, medication in most medical disorders is not a cure. Yes, antibiotics will cure infections. But most conditions that we treat with medication treat the symptoms or try to alleviate the symptoms is not necessarily a cure for the illness. And sometimes people are so overwrought with anxiety that they need, and medication works quickly, and that they may need medication to stabilize them. Sometimes they're too anxious to even benefit from the treatments. And therefore, properly prescribed, and the good psychiatrists prescribe it properly, but properly prescribed medication so that the anxiety is essential. So again, it's a judgment call, and sometimes medication is used, and psychiatric medication, just like psychiatric illness, is no different than medication for other medical ailments, and there should be no shame associated with it. I will tell you, and I'll talk a little bit later, whether we cure anxiety or do we master it. That's, I think, a very important point. But I know people who have been treated for anxiety disorders, but will walk around with either Xanax or Klonopin, facing a very difficult situation that they'll take it just to take the edge off of the anxiety so they can manage it. And again, if you don't take it, fine, then don't take that medication, but it should be no different than how medications are used in general medical ailments. Let me talk a little bit also about old-fashioned psychodynamic psychotherapy. I know I'm a dinosaur, but you know, I know I learned it when I was in graduate school during the Civil War, so it was a little difficult at the time, but it has its place, sometimes as an adjunct, sometimes as the treatment of choice. There are certain people who need to understand themselves. There are certain people for whom that is a master, or they need to understand where this irrational fear came from. And obviously in conjunction with exposure. And sometimes exposure can be done in conjunction with that treatment, but that is helpful to them. I think it's always safest to share personal experiences, because I don't have to worry about, you know, HIPAA laws and exposing something from the treatment that we do. But I will tell you personally that at a certain juncture in my life, becoming aware of being a child of Holocaust survivor and how that contributed to certain impediments and anxieties that governed my life, that I acquired in in the context of psychotherapy, not only helped me overcome those hurdles, but has enriched my life immensely, that now I look at it as an asset and as a contribution to my success. I couldn't have done this if I didn't reach that understanding, if I didn't work on it and relive some of those childhood experiences and redefine aspects of my life in the context of knowing about Auschwitz and not being able to talk about it as a child. Now, if somebody had just come to me at that time, which was around the time I was in college, and say, listen, Blumenthal, you know, you're nuts because your mother's a Holocaust, went through 7 concentration camps, and here I'll explain it all to you. It would have been very interesting intellectually, it wouldn't have been very useful. But letting it evolve gradually and coming to understand it, and then redefine it in terms of other aspects of my life has been an enriching experience and still has a role and still has a place in the treatment of anxiety. Now, let me give you a mashal that I give to the rabbinic students. Dave Pelkovitz and I co-teach the smicha students at YU, and we teach a pastoral psych course. And then when we talk about anxiety, we talk about OCD. Well, we have a fascinating class in differentiating between OCD and Frumkeit. It's very interesting. We have a lot of fun with that. By the way, one thing I do have to say, and I don't like to, I'm not aware of OCD being an Ashkenazi disease. Oh, okay, you just threw that in because you're a Sfardi yourself. Okay, but in fact, the interesting thing about OCD is that the studies show that its frequency in let's not just Orthodox, in a fundamentalist religious community is the same as the general population, but it takes on religious themes. In other words, it's the garb, it's not the presence. But, and actually we have one of my smicha students here, so I can't lie about what I do, but what we try to do is, I give the following example. Again, imagine somebody has heart disease, Rahman al-Islam, something like that. That needs to be treated medically. That needs to be treated professionally. But once that treatment has been implemented, there are many lifestyle changes that you can make that will ensure your health or cardiac health. So going to the health club, leaving out the Kishkan Shabbos, or what is that thing called, Yapcha? I just look at it and I get, I get arrhythmia. But, there's lifestyle change, maybe less stress in your life. So there's a lot that you can do that's not formal treatment, but that can be an antidote to anxiety. And for some instances, it's a very interesting thing that's happening in the world today. Both Rabbanim and teachers are becoming sort of pseudo-therapists. So not for necessarily a full-fledged anxiety disorder, but for students or congregants who have high levels of anxiety but not yet a disorder, a lot of that intervention is being done by the teachers and the rabbis. For example, we have a program in Ohel where we go into middle schools. We're expanding. We did it this past year in a school in Long Island. I was part of that program as well, where we were training teachers to help students with anxiety. Part of the reason for that is, interestingly enough, is the role of the teacher is changing completely. Because the teacher, as the purveyor of information, is not necessary anymore. A kid can click a mouse and find out anything. So teachers' roles are really changing along with technology, and they're becoming much more, their role is much more to put the information in meaningful context, but they're also becoming sort of pseudo-therapists to address the emotional needs and the high levels, as mentioned earlier, the exponential growth of anxiety among both adults and children, to address it somewhat. But as I said, so there's a lot that they can do. So when we talk about, we talk about reading Chovas Halvavos and learning. If I'm speaking, let's say, to Lamudei Kodesh teachers or to Rabbanim, that's important for recovery from anxiety disorder. That's an important way to reduce anxiety. But there are many other kind of things you do. First of all, if you have a family member who has anxiety, don't poo-poo it and don't downplay it. It's real and it's painful. So validate it. You may not be giving into it, and you may have to sort of avoid sort of accommodating it, but treat it as real because it is real. Don't ever discount or invalidate those kind of emotions or feelings. And very few people, unless it's the night before a big exam, are going to present to you that, oh, I have so much anxiety. But they're going to, it's when they're presenting it, they mean it. But other kind of things, outlets are so important. And that's, by the way, where in our community that becomes so jam-packed that sometimes we're remiss. When sometimes I'll have, let's say, a high school student come to me, a yeshiva high school student come to me for anxiety, I'll just ask him, do you get to play ball? And he'll say, yeah, Friday afternoon. In today's world, not only because of anxiety, but because of the kind of restraint we expect from such boys, they should be playing ball several times a day. There's no excuse today for yeshiva not to have a ball field, a gym, or let these exercise. It's such an anxiety release. After you do exercise, you feel calmer. That's very important. Yeah, right. Yeah. And especially the Red Sox need it pretty badly lately. No, okay, but they're for once the Yankees are ahead of them, But anyway, and maybe sports is not for everybody, or exercise is not for everybody. But again, if somebody has anxiety, it's all the more so. But whether it's art, it's music, and by the way, learning, all these kind of, if it works for that person, or reading, or literature, different types of activities, especially when there's a lot of anxiety. And the notion of a 9-to-5 job doesn't exist anymore. We carry our work and all our responsibilities with us in this little holster with the phone. So we literally have to carve out time. And by the way, no time, spend time together with your spouses. Families that eat dinner together, the research is overwhelming, have practically zero instances of substance abuse. To carve out time, family time, to be together, to talk. You don't have to do anything extraordinary. You don't have to do exposure therapy with them. But just spending time, quality time with each other and with children. And we have to, today, we can't just take it for granted. The office doesn't close at 5 o'clock. We have to create those opportunities to have time together, even vacations. It's great to go to amusement parks, etc., or Shabbos for that matter. As you sit with the guests, the kids eat in the kitchen, they run outside and play, you spend no time with the children. Very important. And that is an anxiety reducer that helps. That helps in terms of treatment of anxiety. We have to destigmatize, has been emphasized, mental illness. I often say, just as an example, somebody makes a Misha Berach for somebody. It's a Misha Berach for Chola. So afterwards, you go, well, who are you making Misha Berach for? So you'll say, oh, my father was diagnosed with heart disease, my husband. Why can't you say, you know what, my kid has anxiety? Or my spouse has been diagnosed with OCD. It's no different. Why should it be any difference? And the more we can normalize and destigmatize mental illness, the more people will go for help, and the more we can discuss it and make it a topic of conversation. Now, thank you. Okay. I should run for office. This is great. Okay. Who wants to run for office nowadays? Anyway, one more thing. This is a question that whenever I speak at these kind of community forums, almost always comes up. Right? We know the famous line, right? It costs a lot of money. I can work with somebody, I can go, or I want to go for therapy. I often tell my patients, I couldn't afford myself. It is expensive. So I want to address that a little bit because I think it's an important consideration. And I'll tell you something else also. Let's say if somebody will come to me and say, I really can't afford it. All right, but you know what? I'll only eat bread and water, and I'll sell 3 of my children into servitude, and I'll do something, and I'll scrounge together the money, and I'll just about make it work. You can't benefit. Again, therapy is a collaborative effort, and if it's so much stress, I have the same thing. If somebody calls from Muncie or from Lakewood, they want to come see me once. If they come for a one-time consult, that's one thing. They can come once a week. It's 2 hours, it's 4 hours in the car. That's fine. If you can do that every week, it's going to be such an imposition. And now we have Skype and Zoom and all that, but it's going to be such an imposition. You're not going to benefit from the treatment. So what do we do about this? And again, on the other hand, though, therapists can't be therapists if they can't charge for their services. There was a point in my life when I was working for OHIL, I was working for YU, I was working for Northwell, and I had private practice, and people would say to me, you have 4 jobs. And I said, yeah, 1 for each tuition. So what can we do about that? So first of all, if you can afford it, it's money well spent. I've had patients tell me they made money on therapy because they're functioning better. So they're doing better in their job. Dedicate a certain amount of time. I will tell you personally, and I think that's an important consideration, nothing gets my Irish up more than if there's, let's say, a physician or a rabbi in our community who sends his regular, his paying patients to somebody else, which is fine. There are a lot of very good clinicians and facilities. And then when he has a low-cost one, he calls me. That I'm not going to. I remember there was one Rav who used to do it regularly, and I once saw him and I said, Rabbi, mecheni la mesifracha shakosafta. I'm not that person. But we'd all take some. So that's one consideration. There's group therapy, which is a very effective treatment. Also, we are streamlining treatment. We're working, or doesn't require weekly sessions. We're all aware of this. And especially now with very little and inadequate insurance reimbursement. So it's something that we're aware of and we're working on. But there are also clinics and facilities that offer provisions or services that take insurance or work on a sliding scale. OHIL has 2 such clinics, one in Flatbush and one in Far Rockaway. And granted, the clinicians for the most part are younger and less experienced, although there's some that are more experienced. But it's far from clear whether young new therapists are any less successful than some of the more seasoned people. There's some data that suggests that they compensate in effort for what is maybe lacking in experience. So you can get some very good treatment there, and I can tell you certainly that I'm speaking for Ohel, but I'm sure it's true of Jewish Family Services and the other facilities, our staff. I don't think there's any profession where people so constantly and regularly try to update their skills as mental health professionals do. So that's another option, and there should be and there can be gemachs to help pay for the treatment. These are all should be considerations, but it's a real problem. And I think we have to be aware of it, and we have to brainstorm and figure out ways. But as I said, there are those options, and certainly in the back you see there are many wonderful organizations being featured. Make it a point to come back there, find out what services they have to offer. I'm familiar with just about every one of them, and they're well worth knowing about. And now one more last question, and I'll address that. Do we really cure anxiety? Or do we teach people to manage it? Do we teach people it was used as something constructive? But there's a very thin line between what we to interpersonal sensitivity. There's a very thin line between paranoia and being a good chess player or being a good lawyer or being a good army general, because you're thinking so much about what the other person's doing. But they've triumphed over the anxiety, and they use it constructively. And therefore, some of our most successful people are anxious people, but instead of the anxiety governing them, they rule over the anxiety. And that's to tell my patients, I'm not going to change you. I'm going to make you better at who you are. And that's what we do. And in that spirit, I just want to end with a very beautiful insight that I read from Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, who in this community is somebody, but in the book Ala Tshuva, which is a collection of his tshuva speeches that he gave at RCA, he mentioned the following, that a psychiatrist once said to him that if he could change one part of our tefillah, or one part of our davening, he would take out uvechein tein pachtecha, in the davening of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that we should have fear, that you should give us fear. Because he said anxiety is so much at the root of so many personal problems that he would, if he had the authority to do so, he would take out those words of uvechein tein pachtecha. So Rabbi Soloveitchik's response is, at first he said, I'm not a psychiatrist, but he thinks it's just the opposite. Because there is one fear, there is one anxiety, that if you have it, as we mentioned earlier, it alleviates a lot of the other anxieties. And that's the anxiety and the fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That if you have the Yiras Shamayim, if you have that kind of fear, then all other fears become less important. If you believe that there is a greater control, that there is one person at the helm, and that whatever happens, it's happening for some good desire. Please, if you're going to give me anxiety, that's the anxiety you should give me. Thank you, and I think we have some. Okay.
All right, we have a special program. I'm going to introduce the next, should I say speaker? Presenter. Rabbi Dr. Saul Haimoff. He's a dear friend of mine. He's a licensed clinical psychologist, and he provides cognitive behavioral therapy to individuals with anxiety, ADHD, behavioral issues, and social skills deficits. He received his smicha from REITs at Yeshiva University and currently works as the head rabbi of the Brain Dice School in Lawrence, New York. He also has been working as the youth director and associate rabbi at the Jewish Center of Atlantic Beach for the past 5 years. Rabbi Dr. Haimoff was formerly a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Anxiety and has co-authored a book with Dr. David Rosmarin entitled Handbook of Torah and Mental Health, which will be published by Mosaic Press in 2019 in Mirza Hashem. Please welcome Rabbi Dr. Saul Haimoff.
Thank you so much, everyone. This is going to be a very, very, very short presentation, just a little introduction and a fun activity for all of us. So if you've been sitting for a long time, you're getting a little antsy, we're gonna play something. We're actually gonna practice something together that could help you with anxiety, an actual experiential component. I'm just gonna take a minute or two just to introduce it. I'd also just like to say the unbelievable humility I feel being up here right now. Dr. Norman Blumenthal was actually my pastoral counseling professor when I was in Smicha and NYU, and he taught us as Smicha students, as rabbis, how to be good counselors, good listeners to people in our community. And it was at that moment that I decided that I would like to go and pursue a degree in psychology as well, much to my wife's dismay. So it's humbling to be on the stage with him, as well as Dr. David Rosmarin, who was my supervisor at the Center for Anxiety. And thank you so much to everyone for coming out, and especially to our presenters. We need more events like this, more courageous individuals to speak up and to be open and to break the stigma on mental health. Now, I know it's late, and I don't know how many of you look like you live very close by, but I live in Long Island. And by show of hands, how many people are familiar of ever taking the Long Island Railroad, the LIRR? Okay, great. All right, good. So, when I was a kid growing up in Long Island and used to take the LIRR to Manhattan, I never noticed the names of the lines, the names of the tracks, what they meant. For instance, there's a lot of these funny names, Ronkonkoma, Oyster Bay. What are some other lines people are familiar with? Jamaica, obviously, Far Rockaway, Long Beach, Montauk, etc. I'm very used to hearing those names announced over and over again. So I never understood why it's given a name. And then one day it dawned on me. The name of the line is the last stop. Right? The last stop on Montauk is Montauk. The last stop on the Far Rockaway line is Far Rockaway. That's how they name the lines, and anxiety is. You're ahead, you're in the last stop. You're already in Montauk, you're already in Long Beach, you're already in that last place, that scary, worst case scenario that you think is going to come true, even though you're not. You're just sitting in Jamaica. It takes you away from the present, it takes you out of where you are, when you are, and it takes you to some reality that doesn't exist yet that may not even happen. And that's really the curse of anxiety. It doesn't just take away your future, it takes away your present. So one skill that has been very popular lately is called mindfulness. And mindfulness, very simply, is just paying attention on purpose to the moment, being present. And that's very hard. So for instance, if you ever got the text, the worst text to get is, hey, call me when you have a sec, I just want to talk to you about something, right? Especially from a parent. Right? I can't go a whole work day if it's from a parent or a family member. I got to know right away because I'm thinking about the worst case scenario. So how do you deal with those situations? So in truth, mindfulness sounds like a very new age, very kind of hippy-dippy treatment and movement. But really, we all practice mindfulness every day. We just don't realize it. So anytime you're doing something where everything else in the world just fades away, nothing else matters, you're only focused on what you're doing right then in that moment, that's mindfulness. And that's why we love it so much. So for example, what are some things that people love to do that when they're doing it, they're totally in the moment, they're totally focused? What are some things that people actually like? What is that? Dancing? Test taking, it's true. Doing maybe puzzles, exercise, playing music, cooking, learning, art. Those are all things that people do because they feel in the moment. They feel totally present. So those are good things to do, but sometimes you don't have that opportunity. You're sitting on a train, you're sitting in a class, you're sitting at a Shabbos meal, and you get a panic attack, you get an anxiety attack. So that's where mindfulness comes in, and specifically using the 5 senses. Using your sense of sight, smell, or taste, vision, focusing on one, and luckily there are many senses around us all the time. Focusing on one sense at a time can help you be present and be in the moment and really take your head out of the clouds from what you're thinking of and back down to reality. And that's why it feels good. So I want everyone to take a moment and think from 1 to 10 how anxious you're feeling right now. 10 being a full-blown panic attack, which hopefully no one is feeling in the room right now. And 1 is so chill, you're so relaxed, you're basically, asleep, yeah. So from 1 to 10 in your own head, just think of a number. And we're going to try and do something which I would do privately in an office, one-on-one in a small space, And we're going to try and get a lot of Jews in the room to be quiet all at once for a long period, for 30 seconds, which feels like a long time, but it's not really a long time. And then we're going to check in afterwards and see if that number changed or not. So what I'm going to do is just to tell everyone what the instructions are. It's going to feel a little weird. And by the way, when I was in grad school, I used to hate when our professors would do mindfulness exercises. I was that guy who was rolling his eyes. Our teacher would come in and say, everyone seems very stressed right now. I'm feeling a lot of tension in the room. I'm going to turn off the lights and play some relaxing music. I'm like, no, please, don't do that. So if you feel weird, if you feel awkward, that's part of it. It's okay. Just fight through it. I promise you it gets better and easier every time. I practice this with my patients so much that what was not natural to me has now become natural, and you're able to turn it on. It's a very helpful skill because it's free. You can do it anytime, any place, and very discreetly where no one even knows what you're doing. So we're going to play some nature sounds, just some birds, and I'm not going to give you all the sounds away. All I want everyone to do is just focus on the sense of sound. What do you hear? If you want to close your eyes, that might help. Just notice and identify the sounds in your head. Some people often say, I was thinking about this time I went on this trip, and that's not technically mindful, it's not technically present, because you're not in the moment. Just try and hear the sounds in your head. You will inevitably start thinking about what you have to do when you go home tonight, and that's normal. I'm going to do it along with you, but see how long it takes you to get back to the moment, back to the present, and say in your head, focus on the sounds. Focus on the sounds. Reb Moshe. So how do you feel now? Raise your hand if your level of anxiety went down a little bit from listening to those sounds. There you go. That was about 20 seconds of listening to nature, listening to a YouTube clip. If you are taking a shower, if you're driving, if you are dancing, painting, learning, davening, you could smell a sitter, you could take something out of your pocket, and you could just feel it in your hands. You could put a sucking candy or piece of gum in your mouth or take a drink of water and just focus fully on that sense of taste or that sense of touch. And it has been proven, and you've all shown me, the more you practice it, the more time you have for mindfulness in your life. You're living in the moment. You take that anxiety monster, that curse of Montauk, of Long Beach, of all those places, and you could give yourself the reality back, and you could be present in the moment to enjoy life. That's my spiel. Thank you so much. We're going to have our time afterwards to get around and schmooze. But this is a wonderful event. Thank you to Rav Moshe for organizing in the Shamos, and hope to be back again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Just before you go, just have a quick into the microphone. Okay. There is a surprise. I did not know that this was going to happen, but in the back, there is a medication. It's called naloxone. It has saved thousands and thousands of lives. It is a drug that is administered to somebody who overdoses on an opioid. Just like a fire extinguisher in your kitchen, just like a first aid kit, this is something that is really, really important that we know about and how to use it and have it accessible. We have 50 kits available tonight to those who would like to go to the back, and you get a training. And these are provided, and the training is provided by the mask organization, and they are in the back. Thank you, everybody. number. Okay. Pass me the thing. This one. While you guys are leaving, I just want you to know that on this book, there on the Shar B'Tachan, there is help. We'll do our best to help. Thank you.